Mayegun làwa mọ̀ làmọ̀ tó dòdòdò. Mayegun làwa mọ̀ làmọ̀ tó dòdòdò. Mayegun ti dé ọ̀rẹ́ ara yìí. Lórí Facebook, lórí YouTube. Good morning to you, good afternoon to you, and good evening to you, or happy Sunday to you from wherever you are joining us this moment. It is Mayegun, and it is Sunday Sermon Live. Today, I want to rejig our memory. Remind us all that the more things changes, the more they remain the same. 26 years ago, millions of poor or impoverished, subjugated, enslaved Nigerians took to the streets to celebrate the death of Abacha. They celebrated what they felt was freedom at last. 26 years after that, and yes, people are now looking back and they are like, were you lied to? If Abacha didn't die, would you still have the same memory of him? And those who told us the evil of Abacha, those who ingrained them in our memories, they are now in charge of Nigeria. 26 years after that, Nigeria is the poverty capital of the world. The corruption that people have never seen before, the lawlessness, the abuse of rights, people now disappear just at will, just by expressing themselves. The difference between then and now, they did not have social media. We have social media. The more the thing changes, the more they remain the same. And it is only the lunatics that love to do same thing again and again and expect a different result. Good afternoon to you, good morning to you, and good evening to you from wherever you are joining this Sunday sermon from. A quick reminder, Sunday sermon is not like the other programs, remember, especially to those of you who recently joined. Sunday sermon is like you come into the temple, which is the temple of truth. Mayegun's Diary Political. You are seated there, relaxed, and you are ready to actually hear the truth, no matter the language, the tone of his delivery. Now, sometimes it will make you uncomfortable. Not the real truth. It could be how it is said. So being politically correct, or somehow soliciting for unity, like begging for unity online. Let us be united. Let us this or that, please. You would have to keep them to yourself. Just for your own sake. And if you can't, if you are the type who love respecting just for respecting sake, not because anybody hand it, you are likely also not going to be comfortable. I like saying this at the beginning of the sermon, because the moment that the floodgate is opened, I would no longer care about whose ox is God. Just a reminder, kind of like a caveat. So yesterday, the 8th of June, 2024, makes it, or made it the 26th year that Abacha died. And it was so sudden that it threw the entire country into, first, a state of confusion, a state of shock, then a state of jubilation. If you grew up in the 90s, like myself, you are probably an adult now. You are now, for those who have chosen to have children, you are parents now too. Well, this was the time that personally I didn't understand the economic hardship. I didn't understand why. But I remember very vividly that Abacha was not just a dictator. Abacha was evil. And he was so present, even at the remotest of the remotest communities in Nigeria. It is like today's generation who are now familiar with DSS, Daura Secret Service, or Dokwe Stupid Service, the ones that are hunting people who say something about the government. This was what life was. You don't know who was a spy. Everyone just believed that you do not know who you are talking to. So be very careful when you are talking about Abacha, because you could disappear. Those bold, typical for all generations, bold writers, publishers, those that will always go for the broke, those that would dare where the giants would never tread. Majority of them disappeared without any charges, picked up by the special squad of Abacha. You have to be very careful. But generally, the entire country was gloomy. The poverty was prevalent. I shared in that experience. We were so poor, the economy was so tough that people were cooking, people were eating things that some of you who experienced that will look back today and be like, I remember. We were cooking with wood shavings, sawdust, because you couldn't afford to go and buy kerosene. At the time, there were friends of government who were telling people that this was necessary. Like, it's okay. Abacha was just trying to, just like the Bokuwari's government, Tifnumbu's government, using the state security apparatuses to chase after their suspected political enemies. That was exactly what it was under Abacha. Abacha was president, and there were conventions, there were different rallies here and there, and Abacha was hunting down those. They were asking him, we're saying to him that he was illegitimate, like some of us are saying, Tifnumbu is illegitimate. But you see, those who were pretty much like the identified critics of Abacha at the time, they were easily sort of welcomed by the people thinking they are fighting on their behalf. Many of them were double agents who were working for Abacha, and they were also members of those who were like the opposition. Nothing new, just different characters and all that. So it was 1 November in 1993 that after the breakdown of relationship between MKO Abiola and the military boys, Babangida and co, including Abacha, right? It became obvious that Babangida had to really go. So Babangida decided to go and bring someone who was not like part of the military or anything, or a government contractor, Shonekon, to become an interim president. However, from record, they said all of the supposed junior officers to Babangida that were sacked, like they were like senior ranking officers, Abacha was deliberately left behind. And when Babangida was asked why, he said Nigeria needed someone to manage its fragile security, national security threat of that time. And any government that come to power, they needed someone. And the only person that was capable of holding Nigeria together, especially for interim government of Shonekon, was Abacha. Now, the story of Abacha is, again, just so for the sake of my listeners, the story of Abacha is in two ways, okay? For some of us who are looking back today, right, it was pretty much like a breakup of agreement between the khaki boys and then the unscrupulous criminal politicians who parade themselves as civilians. From the record, there was no coup that happened in Nigeria without the influence, the funding, especially of the civilians, the politicians. Okay, so most of the time the arrangement is that they will be invited into the government once the coup succeed, and whenever they talk for transition into civilian comes up, they will be positioned to take over from their friends. So therefore, majority of those who later became the victims of their power war between the khaki boys and the civilian guys who are the unscrupulous criminal politicians of Nigeria. So those who became victims because of that breakdown of that relationship, power. So when you roll it back, Babangida, when Babangida was banning and unbanning different political groups before finally agreeing to conduct that of 1993, MKO Abiola was solidly behind Babangida's decision. Yeah. Because they were like, oh, we are suspecting that these ones are spending too much money. Babangida was changing his transition dates like about 4 times or 3 times, right? Which was, I would tell them, they were like, they would call their friends who are not military. They'll say, we wanted to go and start political party. You, Chief Abdullahi Siroma, you go and start a party. You, MK Abiola, go and start a party. Kind of that way, right? Then they will now say the government has formed a 2 parties. So these 2 political parties, this is the rule of the game. Now go out there and campaign. So as usual, right? It's going to be about money. Okay. So Babangida was now blaming too much money, too much this, too much that during those transition periods. So he would change it and change it and change it until local coup happened. That shook him. So finally, he now sort of agreed that he was going to transfer to civilian. They now formed 2 parties. So good enough. Their power. Abiola became the major presidential candidate of one. Another guy, Tofa, was made one too. So this permutation behind the scene were just like putting up a show to make people believe that, okay, yeah, we are now going to go and choose our own representatives so that nobody is going to, you know what I mean? Like, it was like that charade. Well, along the line, what's the guy's name again? Zeribe just got a court order that stopped the announcement of the results. As part of the scheme, right? Riot broke out. MKO Abiola left Nigeria. Walasha happened to the point that Shonekan became the interim president. So it was like, okay, they were going to do another election. MKO Abiola spent too much money. This one, they rigged the election there. This one was this, you know what I mean? Like as usual. But this time, Babangida was going to step aside for real. So that it's not going to be part of it anymore. So that people who don't trust him, right, who didn't trust him, they can deal with the new guy. So they put another arrangement there. They now put Abacha to protect that arrangement. So there's an unverified record that while Abiola was waiting for Abacha to do the right thing because they were friends too. Okay, in fact, they were really friends, but not as close as that of MKO Abiola and Babangida. So there is this unverified stuff, right? That's like Babangida was, MKO Abiola was waiting, okay, for Abacha to compel Shonekan, okay, to give, kind of like the order that the suspended announcement of results will be concluded and he should be declared winner. And since it's like Shonekan was not going to do that, so it was easier when they said, this is also not verified though, but it was part of the stuff we were hearing out there then, right? So they said Abacha sought the, the support of Abiola. Say, you are the winner. I will take over the government, get rid of Shonekan, and I can then return you to, hand over to you. And they said MKO Abiola did not flinch. He was like, yeah, go for it. Because that won't be the first time of his like saying, yeah, go on. If you know the kind of person Abiola was, it was one of the biggest government contractors in Nigeria. He made so much money, right, from Nigerian military boys that Nigeria started owing him money. You're talking about MKO Abiola promising to write off Nigeria debt. Like, take for example, Abiola made so much money from the military guys, right, to the point that they were owing him so much. His debt is part of the Nigerian national debt. It's like saying Nigeria is owing local debt too. Nigeria is owing 4 trillion naira. It's out of that 4 trillion naira, Nigeria is owing Abiola over 2 trillion alone. So that was how big Abiola was, right? So his consent to, yeah, go ahead. So Abacha in a palace school, no gunshots, no nothing, right? Just made this announcement like, you remember this if you grew up in the 80s.
Sequel to the resignation of the former head of the interim national government and commander-in-chief of the armed forces, Chief Ernest Shonekan, and my subsequent appointment as head of state and commander-in-chief, I have had extensive consultations within the armed forces hierarchy and other well-meaning Nigerians in a bid to find solutions to the various political, economic, and social problems which have engulfed our beloved country and which have made life most difficult to the ordinary citizens of this nation. Chief Ernest Shonekan took over as head of state and commander-in-chief of the Nigerian Armed Forces at the most trying time in the history of our country. Politically, economically, and socially, there were lots of uncertainties. Things appeared bleak and the atmosphere was heavy with uncertainties. However, driven by the belief in himself, his countrymen, and love for his country, he accepted to face the challenges of our time. I will therefore like to take this opportunity to pay tribute to him for his selfless service to the nation. He showed great courage at taking on the daunting task of heading the interim national government, even a greater courage to know when to leave. Many have expressed fears about the apparent return of the military. Many have talked about the concern of the international community. However, under the present circumstances, the survival of our beloved country is far above any other consideration. Nigeria is the only country we have. We must therefore solve our problems ourselves. We must lay a very solid foundation for the growth of true democracy. We should avoid any ad hoc or temporary solutions. The problems must be addressed firmly, objectively, decisively, and with all sincerity of purpose. Consequently, the following decisions come into immediate effect. The interim national government is hereby dissolved. The national and state assemblies are also dissolved. The state executive councils are dissolved. The brigade commanders are to take over from the governors in their states until administrators are appointed. Where there are no brigade commanders, the commissioners of police in the states are to take over. All local governments stand dissolved. The directors of personnel are to take over the administration of the local governments until administrators are appointed. The National Electoral Commission is hereby dissolved. All former secretaries to federal ministries are to hand over to their director generals until ministers are appointed. The two political parties are hereby dissolved. All processions, political meetings, and associations of any type in any part of the country are hereby banned. Any consultative committee, by whatever name called, is hereby proscribed. Decree 61 of 1993 is hereby abrogated. A provisional ruling council is hereby established. It will comprise the head of state, commander-in-chief of the armed forces of the Federal Republic of Nigeria as chairman, the chief of general staff as vice chairman, the honorable minister of defense, the chief of defense staff, service chiefs, the inspector general of police, the attorney general and minister of justice, the internal affairs minister, the foreign affairs minister, and the national security advisor. Legislative powers will reside in the council. States will be governed by civilian administrators to be appointed later. Also, a federal executive council will be put in place. Our security system will be enhanced to ensure that lives of citizens, property of individuals are protected and preserved. Drugs trafficking and other economic crimes such as 419 must be tackled and eliminated. On the current strikes throughout the nation, following the increase in the price of fuel, I appeal to all the trade unions to return to work immediately. We cannot afford further dislocation and destruction of our economy. On the closed media houses, government is hereby lifting the order of proscription with immediate effect. We, however, appeal to the media houses that in this spirit of national reconciliation, we should show more restraint and build a united and peaceful Nigeria. Fellow Nigerians, the events of the past month, starting from the annulment of the June 12 presidential election, culminating in the appointment of the former head of state, Chief Anas Shonekan, are well known to you. The economic downturn has undoubtedly been aggravated by the ongoing political crisis. We require well thought out and permanent solution to these problems if we are to emerge stronger from them. Consequently, a constitutional conference with full constituent powers will be established soon to determine the future constitutional structure of Nigeria. The Constitutional Conference will also recommend the method of forming parties, which will lead to the ultimate recognition of political parties formed by the people. While the conference is on, the reorganization and reform of the following major institutions will be carried out: the military, the police, the customs, the judiciary, NITEL, NNPC, NEPA, the banking industry, and our higher institutions of learning. This regime will be firm, humane, and decisive. We will not condone nor tolerate any act of indiscipline. Any attempt to test our will be decisively dealt with. For the international community, we ask that you suspend judgment while we grapple with the onerous task of nation building, reconciliation.
Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah.
That was, I don't know if I remember vividly, November 17, 1993. Yes. Abacha declared himself president. Based on his consultation, the civilians